We all know at this point that the upcoming Star Wars game, Star Wars Squadron, is going to be a small game. There are many ways in which we know this. Its price point is set at $40, 650 Rand for us South Africans. There is no planned post-launch support. It is a smaller studio, Motive's second project, and will include modes that support lower player counts. Motive isn't pretending this is anything but a small game either. From interviews they've given so far, you can tell they've poured their hearts and souls into the smaller and more focused project. Some people are disappointed, having just come off big titles such as the robust storied action-adventure of Jedi Fallen Order and the diverse, expansive online multiplayer sandbox of Battlefront 2, which only grew larger thanks to its live service model. A smaller offering in what is seen as the niche genre of starfighting that is not planned to expand is a shift in a direction some fans aren't comfortable with. However, I believe we are happier substituting more breadth of content with more depth of play. It's like the phrase, wide as an ocean but shallow as a puddle, but in reverse. With us being in the current Battlefront 2 live service era, however, it doesn't help that this is a smaller offering with a price point to match. Even if it could be proven to have a sizable amount of depth, being contained to a smaller game could spell unfair comparisons with larger titles. Sometimes I think people want a lake that spans hundreds of kilometers only to be met with a few centimeters of depth. I feel uncomfortable with people dismissing how deep the gameplay could be because it's contained to smaller aspects, when so often after the aesthetics drop, people primarily derive their joy from gameplay, which is more enjoyable when it is more deeply developed. And isn't that the point when games are usually smaller, focused on essentially one thing, to deliver a more rewarding experience where previously it had been shallow? Here are some of the aspects that limit Squadron's breadth to possibly heavily increase its depth. The most obvious aspect that limits the scope of the game is the fact that it is for pilots only, or for players who will become pilots only by playing this game, since this is a starfighter only game. With that comes the obvious facts that the movement system is more complex than the starfighters in Battlefront 2, and probably most games that have featured them in our current era. Drifts, flips, banks, pitches, and much more complex moves were shown in the trailers we have so far. This is going to be vastly different from other casual experiences, and once mastered will give us a fine level of control, opening up opportunities to accomplish the spectacular. Alongside this comes progression that is focused and fine-tuned around the core mechanics, not having to be tied to a progression system that is spread across different experiences, or even having to operate within a leveling system. Squadrons will be able to tailor its progression around how the game itself plays, carving a unique and hopefully totally different system. I can't wait to see how they tie progression with components, cosmetics, and the ways in which they want us to play, fine-tuned. Back to the more obvious, having only 8 ships allows us for a way deeper customization with your cosmetics, trinkets, weapons, auxiliaries, countermeasure, components, hulls, shields, engines, so on. This makes it possible for 2 ships in the same class to feel completely different from each other in both aspects of play and aesthetic. Lastly, having only ships opens up way more possibilities with controls that can further enhance the experience. Things that are now present include power management between shields, lasers, and speed, a targeting system, and complex hull and shield strength monitoring, all of which will provide crucial elements that will allow for exact control of the ships in the skies. I think the first thing that made fans fear the game might not be a blockbuster hit was the player count. Maybe it can feel a bit lonely in a dogfight with only 10 pilots. It's certainly a step down from the 24 on offer in Starfighter Assault. I will point out though, the mode feels bigger because it is populated with bots in that game, which is also confirmed for Squadrons, so keep that in mind. Having 5v5 almost guarantees more tactical depth, and not just from component selection either. I imagine it will be akin to Rainbow Six Siege, in that communication and team balancing will vitally play an important role in winning matches. With it being a more focused game, it is likely to attract way more passionate fans who will absolutely relish in this added level of depth, much in the way R6 fans do right now. Each ship and pilot will have a role. There is no space for a spray and pray playstyle. This fact is ultimately more rewarding and helps limit an all-fighter squadron from emerging. 5v5 is the perfect laboratory for some fine-tuning and balancing. Playing some games that recently have become a bit unbalanced, I can say this is an aspect I am highly looking forward to. With a smaller player count, Motive can hopefully control the pace of matches. This means you'll most likely not be overwhelmed by having to dodge mines, asteroids, tons of enemy ships, as well as having a million bolts fly past you in a ship you might not even have a grasp on the controls yet. Lowering the amount of players can calm that down, and hopefully it won't be underwhelming. Motive has opted to focus the setting to one specific era in the Star Wars timeline. Star Wars fans tend to like jumping around a vast timeline for their stories to sort of sightsee moments they recognize while on the main trip of the story that is taking place, generally. However, the focus is on after Return of the Jedi. In fact, it is hyper-focused on this period during the beginning of the New Republic. This should allow for a more complex story rather than having to stretch it across eras. With this more tight time frame, Motive can focus on the titular squads, short-term goals of their high authorities, and the super high tension that comes with the balance of power shifting in that period. It can give your actions a certain weight knowing that there's a limited time to swing the power in your favor, having events on a knife edge during this specifically tense time. Also, a more consistent setting and theme can be crucial elements in storytelling. It helps to avoid jarring transitions to time periods and grounds the game to a singular central concept. I imagine this will have made it infinitely easier for Motive to construct a better and bolder narrative. The game has been confirmed to not be a live service game. What you pay for is what you get. Hopefully, the team believes the final product will be good enough to release into the world and let us enjoy it. Other than a few bug fixes and meta balancing, the game will not be changed after launch. This is the only point I have contention with, possibly, for a number of reasons. Namely, the success of this game is effectively going to be measured only by launch, with a little chance of expansion and public promotion, even though it will be the only modern game in the Star Wars Starfighter genre. Also, the only addition to this game that is possible, if they stick to the ethos of their original statements, is a sequel. That is only realistic after 2023 if EA gets a form of a license renewal agreement. Pilots are also left with a game that could get stale quickly. It is a smaller game after all. It could have some benefits for sure, such as there is little chance of controversy thanks to this very stable and popular, at least with the always up in arms crowd, business model. It could be a self-contained test of water for niche games, and if it is successful, a bigger, living sequel and more expansive niche games could prove to be a good route for developers and publishers working with Star Wars titles in the future, which can also lead to more positive outcomes and maybe push us back to the days of varied Star Wars games from different publishers. Also, an aspect of imposed limitation Motive have stuck with regarding the design in this game is the first person only perspective. This is a perfect case for limitation because where would you put the UI? Seriously, I know people are upset that it is first person, as third person is easier in many aspects, at least in Battlefront 2, but having it in first person only allows Motive to put their seriously impressive UI and the elements it represents in the game some of the best ways. Also, I'm pretty sure Motive will account for how the feeling in first person plays and adjust accordingly. Last point, everyone else is in first person. I know, obvious, but still. Personally, I'm super excited. Niche games almost always lack the flashy breadth of a blockbuster AAA title, able to cover multiple aspects and appeal to as wide an audience as possible, but are increasingly rewarding due to their stunning level of depth of gameplay. This is something that seems to be wholly represented in Squadrons. The level of depth promise has pilots hyped through the roof. Sure, some of them have wanted a live service and maybe an expansion into more eras, but they are more happy with the game just being a Star Wars flight simulator. Closing, not everyone will be happy about the size of this particular lake, but those who swim in it, I believe, will be extremely happy with how deep promises to run.
That Squadrons is a really focused experience. We're not trying to be all things to all people. We're a pilot game for players who want to hop into the cockpit, and that's all, but we want to do that really well. And so part of it's that. And the other part is just that we've always had kind of a, we say gift to the fans is something that's come up a lot as we work on this game. Obviously, we're a business. We need to have some money come in when we sell a game. But at the same time, we wanted to have the kind of the amount of value you get for the game feel generous. Feel like you pick this up and this is as much or more than you expected relative to what you put in. And so just across the board with our no MTX strategy, as well as the $40 price point, we want something where you pick it up and you just feel good about it.